Where am I, Jonathan? It's good? Great. Oh, it's good to have you here, and good to be able to have the opportunity to present today. So, yeah, I'm Jeremy Markham. I'm from Stats NZ, and I've been part of this community for 2 years, and I've loved it. It's been really cool to be part of a group like this. I came in very green to benefits, and so it's been really good to kind of journey with a lot of the people here. I think one of the things that, if I look at what we've done, that I would love to see more of in the community is more kind of fresh thinking about how we do the real practical stuff. How do we breach what I would call the knowing doing gap? Last time, Frankie over there, she did an excellent presentation about optimism bias, and I really enjoyed it, and everyone enjoyed it. It's great. But during that presentation, it was sort of mentioned, hey, reference class forecasting. And everyone's like, yeah, that's a really good idea. But at the end, it sort of said, who's doing it? And there was only kind of one sort of sheepish hand, sort of, you know. So here we've got this clear problem where we see there's this body of best practice that everyone goes, yeah, that's a good idea. But for whatever reason, it seems very difficult to actually get it in place. So what can we actually do about that? So my presentation today, it's a bit about Stats Journey, but in particular what I'm really trying to do isn't just to talk all about what we're doing, it's to, I guess, foster those insights, foster those ideas in your own mind about how we can maybe think about some of the stuff a little bit differently. And because of that, there is quite a bit of content, but I'm really happy for it to evolve to a bit of dialogue. So if it helps your thinking during the way that you want to actually say, hey, what about this, and what about this, and how does this work, I'm happy to take that. And if dwelling on that means I don't get through all I have to talk about, then I'm perfectly happy, because it's all about helping people in here get those insights. Does that sound okay? A few nods? Yeah. So let me begin. So all stories seem to start with an in the beginning, or once upon a time. It's very familiar to you. So once upon a time, there was a problem. I lost my benefits and I don't know where they've gone. This is a problem that organisations all around the world have. Each of you will have this problem in your organisation, which is why you're here. You're struggling with the idea of getting a really good return on investment from your portfolios. We weren't terrible at Stats, but we certainly saw opportunity to move forward, and we're really keen to do that. And of course, it's essential, it's really important that we do this, because benefits are, after all, the rationale for our investments. In our personal lives, we would not think to buy something that we knew was faulty or was going to just fail on us. We wouldn't do that. We always buy thinking that we're going to get value out of what we do. So therefore, as organisations, we should have that understanding up front. But I think in this community, you probably get all that. What we did. So this is before my time, but one of the things we did was we decided, oh, well, how do you fix problems like this? Well, you go out and you need a framework, right? So we built a framework, and the framework was good. No criticisms of the framework itself, or the templates, or the tools that it had, but it wasn't supported, like it wasn't used. It just sort of sat there, and a few people occasionally would dip into it and look at it on rare occasions, or occasionally put in some of the artifacts, but essentially it wasn't well used. And I would say that one of the projects, as I got into this and began to look at the current state of the projects, one of the projects which I thought was one of our biggest failures actually was one of the ones with the best documentation. So just because you have documentation and templates doesn't mean that you've solved the problem. And it can give you a false sense of security. So we thought we would go beyond that. And as we begin to think a little bit harder about how we might approach the situation, I guess there's three emerging things that come up, which I think were relevant for us, and I think they're relevant for you too. So we came across this guy. It was a bit scary. It was a bit daunting, because we realised some things. So one of the things we realised was that knowledge of best practice isn't enough. In one of my previous roles, I had some time working in the continuous improvement space, you know, a lot of Kaizen and Lean and that sort of thing. And you knew when you were involved in that, you could look to, say, Toyota as the ultimate, you know, benchmark of the people that were mastering this. And yet when it comes to this, benefits management, this is something with trillions of dollars are at stake across the world. We've got so many organisations trying to do it. And the question is, where are these exemplars? Where are the people, the organisations that are being promoted as these people have nailed it? I just don't see them. And what that says to me, the insight is, well, we probably need to do stuff a little bit differently. If we're just doing what everyone else is doing and they're not succeeding, why do we think if we're just going to do what they're doing, we're going to do any better? Another problem we had was about realizing that the scope of this was really far bigger than project management. So to really make it work, it involves people. If you really want to optimize your benefits, you want to have really good messaging from your execs, driving behaviors of people down. You need your people right on the front line, embracing the new solutions that are being given to them. And of course, you need your benefit owners to be really active. But it's a really big thing. It's not just about we need to just influence this small group of people that are directly involved. And so that was a bit daunting. But this is where this idea of merging benefits with change management really kind of began to come, because we're like, well, hang on, so change management, a lot of that is about how do we influence these broader organizational groups. So that's sort of a bit of the genesis of that. Another problem, so who knows this movie? Does anyone remember what it's called? 127 Hours. Yeah. Very close, yeah. So this is a story about some cool guy in America who goes out, it's a true story, goes out, and of course he doesn't tell anyone where he's going, because that's what cool people do, right? Don't ever do that. So he goes out and he's among these canyons and he's jumping around doing this cool sort of exploring. This big boulder somehow gets dislodged and comes down, and his arm there gets trapped in between the wall of the canyon and this giant boulder. And essentially the movie is about the 127 hours that he spends trying to actually figure out how to get out. And ultimately he figures that if he just sort of bends his arm with enough pressure, the bones will break, and then he can use this really blunt pocket knife to saw through his arm, which is brilliant. Because the highlight of the movie is the bit where he cuts through his nerves. I love that the way that, maybe I'm a sadist, but I just love it. So, but anyway, he does manage to survive, but he survives by cutting off his arm, which isn't what you really want. And the point that it's relevant to me is that in this example, the challenge is simple physics. So the work of gravity is working on this rock. It's so strong, it's holding it in place. And the only way would be able to actually move that rock is if he was able to come up with enough force to overcome the force which is keeping it in the place it is now. This is exactly what we face organizationally. The status quo that we have around benefits management is held in place by our organizational culture, our rituals, our habits, our patterns. That's all actually maintaining it. So the only way we're actually going to shift things is if we somehow come up with a force which is greater than what's holding it there. And so I want to really labour this point because I'm really passionate about it. And please excuse me if I sound like I'm ranting, but I love this, right? Here's the diagram. This is me, if you don't know. This is how a picture of a lot of us. I would move, but because of the camera, I am grounded. So this is a picture. So many of us are in roles where we have lots of responsibility, we've got lots of balls to juggle, and we're really conscientious. We want to be seen to be doing a good job. So we tell ourselves, I need to progress all those things that I'm responsible for. That's part of my job. And we kind of have this little fear, whether you acknowledge it or not, that, oh, if I drop one of those balls, it's going to be really bad. I don't want to be that guy. So what that happens, whether you're aware of it or not, and you can probably tell I come from a psychology background, is it creates this kind of latent tension within you, which drives you to instinctively say, I want to do something, anything about everything. I want at any point in time to say that all those things I'm dealing with, all the balls I'm juggling, I'm handling them all and doing something with them all. And in the short term, that's fantastic, and it works really well because you feel you're getting progress, and undoubtedly, if your boss talks to you, they will be impressed too by these things that you're doing. But the problem is, and this is what we have in government and probably lots of other places as well, I think, there is this lack of the real sustainable change that you really want, because those solutions that you come up with aren't really the proper fixes. They're incremental moves, but they're not really enough to shift. So what we need to do is say, well, what is the end that we really need to achieve? What would our organisation look like if we actually had mastered this? What do we think would actually need to happen? What are the stepping stones that could get us there? how much resource would that take, and how much resource are we willing to put towards it? And then we can be really smart. I think benefits management, like everyone buys into it, like everyone's like, yeah, it's a great idea. But the problem is people don't believe in it enough to be prepared to let go of other activities they're doing in order to focus their attention on this. Because as long as you're just playing at it, doing little bits around the edges, it's never really going to see a great improvement. And of course, to try and tackle the great big thing at once is too cumbersome and overwhelming. But in my experience, there are some kind of stepping stones. There are some sustainable blocks that you can put in, and once you've got them, you come to another level, and then you can gradually build on that. Does that idea make sense? It's because the challenge is for each and every one of you is to say, in my organization, how committed am I to this? And if you're not, if you've got other priorities, well, that's okay, because that's being really conscious, and just own that decision. But if you really want to do this, you've got to be smart, and we've got to think, if we're going to make a difference, we need to apply enough energy to it to overcome the inertia. So one of the key things that we've tried to do at Stats is to say, actually, we want to take this seriously. And so that was the genesis, this appetite to say, we actually want to put some decent amount of resource into solving this problem. So this here, Team New Zealand, without wanting to overstate our importance or our significance, there is some parallel between this and our journey. So they came off a heartbreaking loss. It was devastating. You know, we were in the lead. It was like, and then the biggest comeback in history, but it was coming against us. It was awful. All of you, I'm sure, went home and were devastated that day. I don't want to conjure up those memories, but it was awful. They lost a lot of key support, their financial backing. You know, they only had limited funding. It was really, really tough situation. And yet, through that, they made a decision. They could have said, we came so close to winning last time, we should just do exactly the same thing again, because maybe this time we'll win, because we only lost by a little bit. Or maybe they could say, given we've got only this limited money, we should just focus on these areas that we know are established, you know, best practice, because that's going to give us the best chance. But they didn't. They were prepared to take a risk with the whole cyclor thing. We know what the cyclor thing is, right? The grinding alternative, right? So they took a risk. And if that had failed, they would have lost valuable money, and they would have done badly in the race, in the regatta, which would have made them look not so good. But they were prepared to take the gamble. Anyone here have any idea why you think they were prepared to take that gamble? It's pretty obvious. Throw something at me.
Nothing to lose.
What's that?
Nothing to lose.
What's that?
Nothing to lose.
Yeah. So for them, psychologically, they're just over it. It was just so heartbreaking that there was a level of desperation. They're like, we don't want to compete. We don't want to come close enough again. We've got to win this. And they were prepared to take a big risk to win that. And I think this is the challenge for us, is to say, are we just willing to be part of the pack? And we've got Grant here. Do we just want to do enough that Grant could come and look at us and go, oh, you're doing okay. Yeah, I see you're doing a few things. Is that what we're trying to do? Or are we actually saying, hey, what an opportunity. No one around the world seems to be awesome at this. Maybe we could be the awesome people, right? Like maybe we could be the people that could actually find some new innovative ways to solve this problem. So that was what inspires us. And again, this for me is current. This is benefits management as I know it. It is we know best practice. That is a theoretical path, and I love the best practice stuff, right? I love all this Steve stuff. I love managing benefits. It's really helped me a huge amount. But the problem I find is that even though in theory it should work, in practice it's like this. It's scary, and not many people make it through. So we need to take it from that to this. That is me, by the way. Beautiful Taranaki. And so what we're trying to achieve isn't a perfect paved road, but we're something which is far more achievable. It's not saying we're going to solve all the problems, but how can we get it to something which you could look at and go, I could do that. And the reason we need to do that is because, in my experience, and I felt this firsthand many times, sometimes it feels impossible. Sometimes it feels overwhelming. And when you look at this picture, that looks almost impossible to me. But this just looks maybe a little bit hard. And so I tell myself, it's not impossible, it's just hard. Because when I tell myself it's impossible, I just want to give up. But if I tell myself it's hard but doable, then I get really excited and motivated because I'm thinking maybe we can actually solve this. So what did we do? Well, we've got a brilliant head of our enterprise portfolio office, and he came through with this wonderful, wise idea to have an arranged marriage. An arranged marriage between change management and benefits management. And it was a setup not only to create a dedicated function with both, but every person in that team would be responsible for doing both. It's not that you have, we're going to have a change person and we're going to have a benefits person and they're just going to work together. Each person is expected to do both competencies. Now, as far as we're aware, happy to hear otherwise, we're not sure of anyone else who's ever done this. Probably is somewhere else, but we felt that it was just venturing into the total unknown. And in our experience, I want to talk to you about 4 things that I think have come out that have worked really well and been really good. One thing is about having the sort of change management-y people focus. So without, and Koshiki is part of the team type, so she knows this firsthand, so being people, we instinctively approach the task by saying, if we want to get these people to do this, what are the things that are important to them? What are their preferences? What are the things that are their obstacle? What's going on in their world that they might be struggling with? So we would try and enter into the world, engage face to face, try and develop an understanding of who these people were and have an understanding, and work from there and say, how can we make it easy for you? And very user-centric. And some of the feedback that we got from people that have been involved in benefits at other places, and I'm not at all critical because I don't understand how it works other places, but the feedback was sort of, other places are just like send you a spreadsheet and say it just needs to be back to me by this date. And I'm not saying that's what we do, but that was certainly this person's perspective. And they felt that benefits people were akin to kind of the auditors, just the numbers people, and they weren't really interested in any of the complexity or the detail. They just needed something to put in their spreadsheet. So that was something I think it came second nature to us, but I think the people focus, it really has helped get buy-in, and there's a lot more buy-in at Stats now than there was at the time. You'll see my little kitten. What presentation is complete without a little kitten? It gives you a different perspective. You guys following me, by the way? Yeah, not too fast, not too slow. Good, some nods. So it helps with your perspective. So when we go at the beginning of an initiative and someone says, this is how much we're going to save in terms of people resource, because we've been around the block a little bit, we go, hang on, that's going to require quite a bit of change in terms of people. What are you thinking about actually making that happen? What do you think? And so because we kind of know how it works, we ask some questions. And I've personally already had some good success of people saying, substantially revising their benefit forecast down at the beginning after asking some of these questions. Likewise, I'm involved in an initiative right at this moment, and as it's in that, because I'm in change management, I'm really in there in some of the detail. And I'm exposed to some information about the project, which to me emerges as potential early warning signs as a threat to benefit. But I thought to myself, how long would it take for other people to know that? Well, I found out this immediately, and the next time I'm engaging with my benefit owner, the project manager, we can have these really active conversations. But if I wasn't that involved, it would take me another 3-6 months before some of these issues really came to light. So I'm beginning to just notice these things sooner than I would have if I wasn't involved at the change level. The bridge up here is just about making more connection points. Obviously, if you're managing both functions, you have more touch points with the project and with the business and with the key people. You're talking to them about both. You're getting more familiar. There's more opportunities to have dialogue. I think that's important. And this last one is something I'm extremely passionate about. So here I go. Excuse the wrap. I should take some more. One of the biggest problems I think we have with change management is that because the funding is tied to the project, the change management resource kind of finishes before a lot of the work needs to be done. So they can do great work up front, lots of comms, lots of engagement, lots of training. They can come up with a great BAU plan, but there's a difference between having a really good plan and thinking you've got your buy-in from the business and actually having it. And it's so easy once the project's closed to mentally tick the box, wanting to move on to the next thing, and that change manager, they're not around anymore. So often those plans about what people are meant to do fall to the ground. What we do, and Zoe can attest, and Zoe's in my team, and she's working on a project at the moment that closed. How long ago did that close? June?
Yeah, June.
Yeah, and she's still working out heaps on it. Because as far as we're concerned, it's all about the benefits. So we continue working until we feel the business is positioned to get those optimized benefits. When I've done lots of roles in my time. One of the roles I did was a business analyst, and I did a lot of business process design, and I used best practice to do that, and it was great. And when I rolled it out, everyone's like, yeah, this is awesome. But then after that, I moved to a different role where I was doing continuous improvement. And time again, I found that there were processes that is part of our BAU that are actually really inefficient. And you would say to people, well, what's the problem with this process? And they would say, oh, this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong. And I said, well, why haven't you fixed it? And they'll say, oh, well, it's just the way it is. We just haven't really thought about it. And so I think when we roll out our solutions, very often the processes that we have set up, or the ways of using the new systems and things, they've been based on a model of how we think it's going to work, but in reality there's new opportunities, there's new ideas to come through, and actually we need to get those soon. We need to get people thinking about them quick. So for our mind, it's this whole continuous improvement, plan, do, check, act, continually getting the business to be really actively thinking about how they can make the most out of their solution. That's key, I think, to optimizing benefits. So I've got some interesting characters I want to introduce you to in a minute, but at this point, are you guys happy if I do that? Yeah. Cool. Because we can have some questions at the end. So who's this guy?
Business owner.
What's that?
Business owner.
Brilliant. Yeah, so what's he known for? Yeah, he's known for lying, right? So
Strategic misrepresentation.
you know the idea of strategic misrepresentation, which is probably the most comedic thing about benefits management, that euphemism. People intentionally overstating benefits. So along our journey, one of the people we meet is Pinocchio. And it's not overt at stats, I've got to say. There's no concrete evidence of it, and there may not be in your organisations because it's quite hidden sometimes. People come and they say, my thing, it's going to do this. And even with the benefits expertise that we've been building up, sometimes there's some technical stuff in there and you're like, oh, I don't know. Like, I can ask you the hard questions, but some of the actual figures, I don't know. In the Managing Benefits book, off the top of my head, I think it's in one survey in the United Kingdom, which is a bit like us, 38% of people, business case writers, said they intentionally overstated benefits. Similar survey in Australia said 20-something% said they regularly did it. So that's a huge proportion. So one of the questions for us is like, well, surely this would be a factor for us. It's not staring us in the face, but if we were to take what's come through from that managing benefits material and some of the verbal stuff we hear from people, because I've said this to people, I went to Australia actually and gave those figures a while back, and the people were like, yeah, actually we do that. So it does seem to be some evidence, and at Govis as well, like people said the same thing. So how do we approach it? Now, I think there are 3 doors. One door is to ignore it and just try and tell ourselves that we've got good people who would never lie. But that's going to do nothing to actually fix the problem. And if you don't fix the problem at the beginning of the process, then you've got no hope at the end. And in fact, in saying that, I want to say something which I haven't really heard before, but I think this whole idea of strategic misrepresentation isn't just something at the beginning. I think it goes all the way through. The same things that drive people to lie at the beginning are the same things that will drive people to lie at the end. If you've ever seen a project with, say, 3 benefits, and 2 of them are disastrous, like 2 of them just totally fail, but one does really well, which is the one that gets talked about? And which are the ones that get swept under the carpet, right? It's all the same thing. Another approach you could take is to essentially go on the witch hunt. You know, we've got to find these people, we've got to performance manage them out. You know, we can't have people like this in our organisation because we've got integrity here and we won't tolerate that, right? But I think that's a pretty dumb idea too. And one of the reasons I think it's pretty dumb is because if it's true, you actually believe that up to about 40% of your people are that dishonest, well, you've got some pretty bad recruitment issues. You've got to work out your recruitment process because there's a problem there. But also, you know, how are you going to prove it? Do you really have the appetite to performance manage these people? I just think it's unworkable. However, I come from a background where I've done a lot of social psychology, and one of the things that's really clear is that people tend to believe that their behaviour is driven by their own attitudes and decisions, but in actual fact, it's very much more influenced by the environment we're in. Cultural forces, obedience to authority, conformity, are just amazingly, the studies are just will blow your mind at how manipulatable we are and how we conform to do crazy things if just the other people around us are. So if we understand that, we understand the premise that the problem only exists because the system is allowing it or reinforcing it. Now, in the notes that Grant said, I've put together some notes, not the presentation, but some supporting things which might be able to help you think about this stuff as well. And then there's a diagnostic tool or a tool that you can use for diagnosis, which helps you actually think about your system environment and think about what some of these things might be. But just one thing really practical, because I'm thinking about time, that we do at Stats, is we understand that one of the reasons this might happen is because people might feel it's part of the game. People might feel that everyone's doing it, and if I don't do it, my project's going to be seen worse, or the decision makers are going to expect that we're all overstating it, and they're going to kind of mentally discount it. So that's not really giving my project a good shot. So we try and get around that by by creating a level playing field, make sure that all the initiatives have to come to this independent review by us, and we ask them the hard questions up front. And because it's independent and they know everyone has to go through the same process and it's quite rigorous, that it is a level playing field.
Do you think there's a problem there also with people's definition of benefits? Because, you know, if there's a focus benefits primarily on economics, then you're going to get that kind of stuff. But
yep.
if you look at benefits as slightly wider and the ability that it gives you the ability to be more flexible and do other things in the future, so there's a wider element of benefits taken, you know. So if you can force people to be hard on the economic bits, but then look at other benefits that have a wider implication, that can get around some of those problems.
Yeah, and so, wow, I could talk for a long time. Very good point. And it also highlights the problem, you know, because we tried to introduce like what we call a normalized scale so that you can compare non-financial and financial better, because we find that's a problem where everyone just goes to the money and they forget about the other thing, even though the primary reason we exist is actually to do the non-financial stuff. But absolutely right. And in fact, despite the fact that we constantly hear these statistics, maybe a bit controversial here, but despite the fact we hear these controversial statistics about how projects fail and how they don't get many benefits, I suspect that might be an inaccurate picture because I think they probably understate some of the emergent benefits that were never really considered in the first place. And I think very often why we focus on our top 3 or whatever, there are other things and enabling things like that that sometimes we don't recognise properly. But absolutely agree with your point, and I'll talk about emergent benefits in a minute if we have time. So another character we met, so we've met Pinocchio, we're on our journey, and we keep going along, we come across this fellow. Those of you with children might know this fellow. Who's this? It says, so it shouldn't be hard, this is the Lorax. So this is a Dr. Seuss invention from the book The Lorax, and the idea of the Lorax, his job is to advocate for the trees, because the guy comes along and cuts down all the trees, and it's his job. He stands up and defends the trees. And essentially that's a bit like what we think a benefit owner should be. Huh? We think a benefit owner should stand up and be like, well, you know, I'm going to protect my benefits and make sure they all get, you know, they grow and are nurtured. But one of the things, and so we talked about before that actually benefit owner training, that's something that Jonathan and I and Zoe and there's a bunch of us, Koshiki, you know, we're all involved in trying to like put together some training material because we realise that there's a gap there, right? that's a problem. But as I began to think about it, I became really aware of the fact that there are some really competing incentives working on benefit owners. So in one breath they can say to you, yeah, if this happens, I should do this. But then when you play in those other things that are happening in their world, you understand that it's not so easy. Things become a bit ambivalent. They want to do this, but they also want to do this. So it could be about having strong personal relationships with the people you're talking about, the desire to be wanting to seem to really back the project, support the project, but on the other hand, you're sensing that maybe things are going wrong, but if you put up your hand and saying, I'm really concerned about this, does that seem to be undermining the project and things like that? So there's a whole bunch of them that can cause this ambivalence, where they're torn between these two things that they feel they should do. And ambivalence is the nurturing ground for procrastination, right? We just spin round and round and round, don't do anything because we're not really sure what we should do. So there's some different things you can do about that. But one of the things that we're trying to do at STEP is a different model where we're trying to, with all our benefit owners, set up a bi-monthly coaching. So it's not about a big review, it's bi-monthly coaching. And the idea of that is saying you don't need to know everything you need to know about being a benefit owner. But in this half an hour, I want to talk to you, get a feel about what you're thinking about benefits, and help you get clarity about what are the three things you could do in the next 2 months that are going to advance the active management of your benefits. So really trying to say, how can we actually practically move this forward? And so there's a bunch of other things. I'm just giving you like single examples to show you that there's actually some really practical solutions we're trying to implement. I won't labour this one too much because Frankie talked about it last time, and with my psych background I could again talk about this all day because I love it. It's one of my favourite topics, about the whole cognitive biases, heuristics and things like that. And we know it's, I guess, a really big problem, and there's a whole bunch of things that we're trying to do. But if I can just give the example that I highlighted at the beginning of the presentation, and that is that we've got these ideas that we say we like having reference class forecasting, which if you're not aware of what that is, it's essentially making sure we're looking at a track record and saying, how do we think this compares to things that happened in the past? But I think one of the reasons that we don't do that is because it's onerous. Where do I start? I've got to get the data. How should I set up the data? Oh, I've got to, how would I construct it? How do I persuade people? It just sounds like quite an undertaking. And so one of the things we've tried to do is say, okay, we want to get there, but we don't think we can get there yet. But is there anything we could do that could take us part way? And so we say, in terms of stepping stones, hang on, if at least we could get our decision makers thinking, asking different questions, that will help them going along the way. So I sat down and thought, right, and let's nut out what are some of the key questions that decision makers might ask of an initiative that would force the discussion to centre around, hey, what projects is like this that we've done in the past? What are the problems we've encountered in the past? The people who are delivering it, have we, what's their track record? And how do we because even if we can just get those conversations happening, if they actually happen, then that'll create more buy-in and impetus for us to actually move forward into reference class. So instead of taking this big leap, it's about saying, well, let's take a little leap, establish that, and then take another leap. This guy, Bilbo Baggins. Some of you are probably unfamiliar with books and the movies, so I don't mean to exclude you, but for anyone who has done it, you'll remember that at the beginning of the story, they try and get him to go on this great journey, which he eventually goes on, but he doesn't want to go because his life is really good. His life is comfortable. He's got tons of food and he's got a nice warm home, and the idea of adventure may sound cool, but really he likes his comforts. And this is a challenge I think we all have. We've got a saying there, the biggest enemy of the best is the good. Takes a bit to get your head around that if you're not familiar with it. The biggest enemy of the best is the good. So when you're in a bad situation, a desperate situation, you're highly motivated to do something to get out of that situation. But when you get to a comfortable situation, when you feel your project has delivered enough benefits, then you kind of feel, oh, okay, I've done enough, we can move on, right? And so that when you get there, you don't push yourself on for the best. You don't push yourself on to optimization because there's not the incentive, because everyone's saying, hey, good job, you've done well, you know, you've hit the minimum benefits required for us all to be happy, let's move on. And so this is where that whole idea that I raised before about how do we really push for continuous improvement, benefits, change management, continuous improvement, all to be seamlessly connected. Yeah, and strategies in there as well, which I don't really talk about in this. But so again, that's what we're doing about how to press forward with those emergent benefits. And that benefits coaching as well, that's where we're really trying to help surface some of those emergent benefits, some of those things that I'm not quite sure of your name, sir, but the gentleman who was talking before about, you know, that's the forum that we want to actually get the discussion to take place. Not only to say, based on what we had, what's your sense check saying, but also what else is arising? Where else can we see value emerging? So this one of the last ones is just about shifting ground. So the earthquake was hugely disruptive for us in our program, our portfolio I should say. But it's not only that. There are technological shifts, there are social shifts that are having a major impact. So I'm not too sure of the detail behind the recent KiwiBank thing that came out. But I did read one thing about it, which is, you know, obviously is massive millions and millions of dollars that they've written off. But one thing I read was they seem to be saying, well, customer needs have changed so much that we're not even sure the solution that we were going to do was really going to meet their need anymore. Something like that. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. But certainly even at stats, we've had times in the past where we've invested in something, but as time has gone on, we've begun to think, actually, that was a really good decision at the time, but because new technologies and things are emerging, maybe there's another tack we need to take. So how do we deal with these shifts? When we've invested so much money in going one way and then something else pops up, how are we going to pick up on that? So this is around, you know, the coaching, and that's part of it, but also ensuring that at the beginning, as much as possible, we're asking these strategic, broader questions, forcing people to think outside of our silos of our organisation, to think about, you know, what are those social, technological, environmental things going on which may actually have an impact, and particularly, if you had to identify, so if there's a benefit owner in front of you, you could say, if you would have to identify what some early warning signs of major shifts would be, what would you look for? Asking questions like that. I won't talk to you about pylon treat houses, but I love the picture. But this is just to say, so I've only picked on a few, but there's actually a ton of other things that we have struggled with and tried to work through. But what I will do is tell you that just say that we are on a path. The story is not complete. We are on a journey. And I think in many regards, there are people here in this room who are still doing many aspects of benefits management better than us. So I'm not saying that we are the masters by any respect. I don't want to do that. It's more the point to say, I think that we're thinking about things in a slightly different way, and maybe some of those ideas might be useful to you. But what I would say is that as we've gone on and we've had an ideas and we've faced our challenges and we've met all our different characters, we've ended up in a place where we've got a Pick a Path book. So I'm not sure if you're aware of this. This is called Fighting Fantasy, I think, but my son read it a while ago. And when I was a kid, I read some of these. Anyone read this as a kid? Yeah, there's a few nods. Yeah, they're quite cool. But so in an ordinary book, you begin at the beginning and you start reading, and it's the same. It doesn't matter if you put it down for 3 weeks and pick it up again. It's always the same. The same ending doesn't mean if I read it or Grant reads it or Zoe reads it. It's always the same. In this, you get choices. You can say, actually, do you want to do this or do you want to do this? And if we're smart, we can get different outcomes. So this benefit world is metaphorically a forest of doom. There's lots of ways we can all fall off here. But if we're smart, we can actually find a path through. And so the challenge for us is saying, well, how do we continue on and find that path? And there's some things up there, but I think the most critical thing that we need to do, or one of the most critical things, is to be open to new ideas and not just doing what everyone else is doing. Be prepared to try something really different. Get really clear on your commitment. Not doubting the fact that you're committed to benefits, how committed are you? How much resource are you actually prepared to commit to this problem? And then and identify your sustainable stepping stones, and importantly, like build alliances, strengthen numbers. So I think it's very difficult to do it alone. Within your organisations, you can partner up with all sorts of people. There can be people, strategy, finance, whatever, that might be of use, evaluation. But also in this community, and I know that one of the things that the fellows up front were talking about was about how can we create an environment where after, at the end of sessions, we can actually come and ask questions and throw problems around and say, how would you do this? So that we can all begin to wrestle through those things. So that's my thoughts. But any kind of questions or, and Zoe's here too, she could probably answer some. Koshiki may remember some things from the early days. Any kind of questions or ideas about this that's coming up for you? Yes.
I'll start off. Benefits owners, how have they responded to what you put in place, that coaching, and what's been their response?
Yeah, so good. So it's quite a recent thing, so I only just started, but I got to the point with one benefits owner who, because I suggested to them, I said, well, it's sort of annual performance review. This is a key part of your role. Would you be open to including this in your performance objectives for the year? You know, because, you know, and they were like, oh yeah, actually, that's, so when you actually have them saying, actually, that's a really good idea, whether they've done it or not, I'd be sceptical, but, and honesty, but when you begin to hear them say that, that's great. And one of the keys is that we don't talk in blame language. So when things go wrong, it's usually we know it's because of the system. So I can say to someone whose benefits already are a total mess, and hers, how should I say, due to a bunch of reasons, not just her fault, but we're not looking good. Instead of saying, man, this is terrible, you know, it's all your fault, you can say, hang on, right, so let's recognise there's a whole bunch of things that have gone on here. It's not just you, but then how do we constructively move forward? So I think, and there's been a couple of other people as well that we've worked with on it, and I'm pretty confident that it's going to work really well. Yeah.
Interesting. I like the idea of pulling together the change managers and the benefits owners.
Yep.
I guess the challenge there is that often, as you mentioned, change managers are costed and funded as part of a project. So if you're going past the end of the project and you're still working on the project, are you funded independently outside of that, or do you get the benefit owner to kick in some money for the extra work you're doing, you know, later on to actually help them?
Yeah, so great question, and as a former BA, always coach say, this is our solution, but it's not necessarily your solution, because it's about going back to need. So what we did in our first year, we were recoverable, so projects had to pay for us, and then we realised actually maybe that's driving some perverse behaviours, so we made the decision you're not recoverable, and so that removes that cost. So because we're a permanent resource, we have that time, and we now sort of factor in, Joe was doing a resourcing today, and we actually intentionally factor in a certain amount every week. We were actually doing those follow-up activities.
Jeremy, how successful have you been in having assigned and committed measurements from us on projects?
Yeah, so that's one of the things we really do struggle with.
Yeah, can you repeat the question, please?
I was just talking about getting measurement owners. So ideally you've got your benefit owner, but then under that you'd have to assign a specific person who's really driving the measurement of it. And so I think with the Jenna work, where it talks about integrating benefits with the performance management, as much as possible we try and choose measures that are already in play, because then they're much more likely to, you know, they're so much easier to track. And saying that, very conscious about validity, because if you just jump to existing measures, they may not actually tell you what you really want. So it really is a fine line, but we are thinking a lot about validity and feasibility. Because one of the things we do is we create too many measures because we think it'd be really good to have this, but it's just too much, and people just kind of go, I just don't have it. So how do we whittle it down into a few? So it's not terrible, but it's still something we're struggling with since you're around.
And the change request team, because that was the other thing that I used to basis. Are you actually being informed of change requests, and whether is there benefits review happening at that stage?
Yeah, so So it's not a black and white, but more, and Zoe just worked on a recent one with one of our really big pieces of work where they said, actually, even though there's no major milestone right now that we needed a benefits review, it was just people saying, the benefit owner was saying, actually, we've learnt some more, can we spend some time reflecting on it? And as a result of that, they're putting up a change request because they want to tinker things around to that. So there is certainly evidence of that emerging, which is cool. Yeah.
How many projects have you got? Two-part question.
Yeah.
How many projects have you got in stats going on at the moment?
Yeah.
And how big's your team?
So we would probably, was it about maybe 15 or so? Yeah. So probably
Well,
about.
that's the team size. Or
No. So there's 15. Well, I'm off the top of my head, but that's a guesstimate. It's probably about right. Some of them are low intervention because we've actually decided for the nature of the work and where it's at, we've actually decided to sort of not cut our losses, but just to try and be strategic, saying actually it's not worth us putting resource in that. Other ones we've said, for example, one of our big projects, we've got someone that's all they do. So we've got a team of 4, which includes a manager and three worker drones, such as myself. And we're really just constantly having to prioritise because there's plenty of work, but we're just always having to prioritise and say, well, actually, ideally we'd spend more time on this, but let's try and take a real lean approach. One thing I would say though is that because there's several of us working on the same, we have got a lot leaner. There's so many artifacts and stuff that you can sort of reuse and modify, and you can do it a lot less resource